my wife called it the carcass for the longest time. She said, what are you going to do with that carcass in the garage? I said, well, it's actually a car, but until we actually mounted the body back on the frame, she didn't believe it was really a car. I got the red 68 1600. A friend of mine was into Fairladies, as he called them, which is their Japanese name. And this red 68 was in his family since 1971. So it's actually never been quote unquote restored. It's been kind of maintained. And it's actually a fairly low mileage, fairly original car, which is one of the cool things about it. And he wanted to sell it because he had 3 other Roadsters, but he wanted to sell it somewhere close at home. And it was actually the first classic car I bought was his 68 Roadster, and always calls it my dad's car. I'm selling you my dad's car, so there comes a lot of responsibility with his dad's car. And so I got it because I never really knew about them, but then when I saw his, I said, that's a really neat little car. It looks really good. To me, I see a little Austin Healey, a little MGB, a little 59 DeSoto in the back end. And so it was the first classic car I got, and it was the perfect first classic car because the community was blessed. There's a ton of support for them. They're incredibly easy to work on, and they're Japanese, so they run. In '64, it was a 1500 single barrel carb, and then in '65 they put in the upped it to 1600 and put the twin SUs on it. That was the car until the end in 1970. So the 1600 was always kind of their entry-level sports car model, but again, very competitive against your standard Triumph or MG and stuff. And so the 1600 came with a 4-speed transmission. As a comparison, the 68 1600 compared to an MGB, 96 horsepower in the Datsun versus about 85 in the MGB. It was originally a yellow car. Sometime in the 70s or 80s, it was painted the red you see now. And that's been the paint that's been on it since then. It was basically, I would call a good driver car when I got it, but I've been improving it over time. I had the dashboard taken out and redone. The dashboards on the late model cars are a safety dash, so they're foam padded, and like all those cars with the sun, they crack and deteriorate. So I sent it off and had redone it, just dashes, put that in. I've gone through brakes, I've gone through clutches, I've gone through, but basically I've just driven it. I mean, it was my first kind of collector car. I don't worry about driving the red one. I kind of get paranoid about driving the one I put all that work into restoring. I don't even usually look at Craigslist, but one day I was just looking through Craigslist in Albuquerque, searching under Datsuns, and there was an advertisement for a '69 2000 Roadster, and it was a Solex car. So right away, that grabbed my attention, and I said, "Wow, that's a Solex car. Those are very special. They're basically a 150 horsepower car versus 135 for the SU cars." $67.5, they came out with the 2000. It ran in parallel to the 1600, and it was the higher priced, better equipped model. You got the bigger engine with overhead cams. You got a 5-speed transmission, which was almost unheard of, certainly in a lower priced car. I think the Italian cars You could get 5 speeds, but most of the German cars you couldn't. I have the original sticker for this 2000. I think it was somewhere around $3,700. Now $700 back in the 60s was probably more like $7,000 today, but it's still a very attractively priced car and very competitive. They probably only brought maybe less than 10,000 2000s to the United States. They came out the run of 500 from the factory with what they call the competition package that had the PHH 44 Mikuni Solex carbs and a hot cam and a competition oil pan on it. That car was 150 horsepower from the factory. And so people would buy the carb package and the cams and everything and put it on their cars, and they would go racing. And these cars were extremely competitive racing. So you have a 150 horsepower little Roadster during a time when a BMW 2002 was maybe 85 to 100 horsepower, depending on what you did to it. And so I called my friend Shannon, I call him my car pusher because he's the one that sold me the 1600. And we went over to look at it. Well, father and son had taken this car, and it was literally in a million pieces in their garage. They had gotten it from the estate of the original owner. They had all the original paperwork for it, which is a trip. And they had taken it apart and then never got it back together again. And so looking through the original paperwork, we saw that the engine only had 20,000 miles on it. The guy had kept pretty meticulous documentations on it. He had traded in a '69 Mustang for this car. We got the original bill of sale and all the paperwork, and it tickled me no end that he traded in a Mustang for this car, And so it was actually basically a pretty solid car. It had a lot of what I call insults, just minor dings, dents, and not a lot of rust, which is fortunate. Not really intending to have done this, I bought the car, and I wasn't that intimidated by it being in a million pieces because I knew these cars really well, and I knew I could get parts for them, and I knew I had helped to get it back together, and so we got it in and embarked on about a 3-year restoration for it. We pulled the body off, brought it to one shop, and as typical with a lot of restoration projects, the shop just never got around to working on it. I totally pulled it out of that shop, brought the body to another body shop here in town, and they ended up doing a magnificent job on the body. They were Miatas before they were Miatas. They were the car that put a nail in the coffin of British sports cars. Very, very good front disc brakes, very good front suspension, and a cheaper price than an MGB. So they were really kind of laying the law down. As one article I read put it, Datsun is showing us what they can do. And of course, right after this came the Z car, which killed the British sports car industry. So it's kind of a pioneering car in that respect, a landmark for the Japanese car industry, certainly in the United States. And in retrospect, Japanese cars have looked a lot better than they did during the day when there was still a lot of anti-Japanese sentiment, and people thought of them much like we thought of Korean cars when they first started to come over. Just you buy them for a price. But the reality is they were really landmark cars in a lot of ways. When I first started with this car, and we were at Solvang at the Roadster show, and a sweet young thing comes up and says, "Are those MGBs?" I said, "No ma'am, you wouldn't see 100 MGBs running at the same time." And that's the truism about Datsuns. You dial them in, you kind of get them up and get everything going, and they just run. We think nothing of driving 15 or 16 Datsuns out to the Williams show in Arizona. This is a 700-mile round trip, and we generally get a group of people and just go and do it. So in terms of driving personality, though, I find the two cars have different characteristics. The 1600 is much more, I don't know how to say it, carefree and fun. It's a car you can really push hard, and by today's standards, it's not incredibly fast at all. But by the day's standards, it was considered a quick car, not fast but quick. But it's a very fun, relaxed sort of drive. The 2000, especially with the Solex carbs on it, is much more hard. It's really fun because it's actually fast. Other differences you would notice in driving the two, the 5-speed transmission has a much more precise gear change, so it actually shifts much nicer. The 4-speed is kind of it's not a bad gear change, but the gear shift tends to move all over, and it was that way from the factory. It just isn't that precise gear change that you find in the 5-speed. And then in late '69, Datsun changed the steering from worm and peg to recirculating ball. So my '69 2000 has the recirculating ball steering, so it's much more precise and a nicer drive than the 1600. The 1600 is like would be like driving a Miata, and I would say the driving the 2000 is more like driving a Honda S2000. It's just a much more hard-edged sports car, much more aggressive sports car. Total overall Roadster production worldwide over all the years was only about 50,000. So these are pretty rare. As a comparison, there's about 500,000 MGBs that were made. So total Roadster production is only about 1/10 of that. So these are comparatively rare cars. But what I think is fascinating is I know of more Datsun Roadsters actually on the road than I do MGBs. So they have held up and lasted relatively well.